Broadcasting from Charlotte, North Carolina, on Sports Byline USA, uniting sports fans everywhere. This is Unpacking It with Bryce Johnson.
If God wasn't in my life, I really don't know how I would get through it, how I would play this game.
For the next hour, we will unpack sports, faith, and life with intriguing guests from the sports and entertainment world.
As people, we get caught up in, I can do it, without allowing God to come and work and actually be the center of it all.
Bringing you high energy and thought-provoking sports talk with a purpose.
He knows I'm not perfect. I'm not going to be right all the time, but I'm going to continue to love him first and foremost.
Now, from his mic to your ears, this is Bryce Johnson.
Welcome to Unpacking It, where we unpack sports, faith, and life with intriguing guests from the sports and entertainment world. I'm Bryce Johnson. So glad to be with you. Today on the show, we will be joined by the Hall of Famer, Rod Woodson. He's one of the best players to ever play in the secondary in the NFL. He played both cornerback and free safety and played for multiple teams. Had a really interesting career. Spent 10 years in Pittsburgh and probably had a Hall of Fame career there. And then he goes on to win a Super Bowl with the Baltimore Ravens and spent some time with San Francisco and Oakland as well. And so we'll ask him all about his career, but also his faith journey and what he's up to now as an analyst with the NFL Network. And so I think you'll really enjoy his perspective on things. And he's a great analyst, and he was actually a coach recently with the Oakland Raiders as well. And so he's just a football guy, and really looking forward to having him a part of the show today. At the end of Unpacking It, we always do our segment, Unpack This. And so today's topic is about the Kansas City Chiefs and their new defensive coordinator and kind of their new strategy and approach on defense and how it relates to our own lives, how it relates to faith. And so we'll get into that in just a little bit. Check out our website, unpackingit.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Bryce Radio. We thank all of our great listeners and affiliates for tuning in today and each week. And those of you listening on Sports Byline USA, Sirius XM Channel 211, Dan Patrick Radio, TuneIn Radio, and the iHeartRadio app. Glad to have you. Rod Woodson joins us next.
Inspiring conversations and intriguing interviews. More Unpacking It with Bryce Johnson after this. Bringing you unique insight into the faith and character of guests from the sports world. Welcome back to Unpacking It with Bryce Johnson.
It's Unpacking It. I'm Bryce Johnson. Our website is unpackingit.com. You can also email me, bryce@unpackingit.com. And joining us now is Pro Football Hall of Famer and Super Bowl winner Rod Woodson. He played 17 years in the NFL after being drafted 10th overall by the Pittsburgh Steelers. After 10 seasons with the Steelers, he also spent time with the 49ers and Raiders and won a Super Bowl with the Baltimore Ravens. He played his college football at Purdue and grew up in Indiana. Since his final season in 2003, he has spent time as an NFL analyst and as a coach with the Raiders. He is currently an analyst with the NFL Network. He is a husband and a father of 5. We are thrilled to have the great Rod Woodson on Unpacking It today. Rod, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
Man, I am doing outstanding. Thanks for having me on.
Great to hear. And I guess first up, how has the summer been going? What have you been up to this summer?
This summer, I just moved. Just moved to Las Vegas, Nevada from the Bay Area. So got out of the high prices to the high heat.
Wow.
From one to the other. But it's awesome. It's a lot cheaper here. So in retirement, when I do retire, it'll be a little bit better for the family and in my pocketbook. And so I've been doing that. I did that, probably about a month and a half ago. And then now I'm doing some stuff with Pro Football Hall of Fame Academy. So it's an academy we started this is our 4th year, but our 3rd full year that we do camps. And we're in Canton, Ohio, We had some All-Americans come through. Then we had some rising high school players come through, and then with some international players. And then we had our youth program come through throughout the whole week. So we're there the whole week going through football settings with them and life skills. And then we take that same model and we take that internationally.
Wow.
And we've gone to Mexico, we've gone to France, we've gone to Germany. So doing that and trying to grow that. And then last year, I had our first inaugural World Bowl that we did in Mexico City. So we took all the 3-star, 4-star players, 5-star players in the U.S., about 55 of them, and we blended in like 3 native-born Mexicans, and then we blended in, I think, 2 guys from the Netherlands, 2 guys from France. They came over in Mexico, played in a all-star game. So we did that last year for the first time. We're going to do it again. We also did the first the early signing period that we now have in college in early December.
Yeah.
We did that same thing in Mexico City on CBS Sports. So it's been fun. It's been busy.
Yeah, no question. Well, so what is your role specifically then with the Academy?
Well, I'm kind of the overall spokesperson for the Academy, but then, we do our breakout sessions. I do take the DBs, and sometimes I'm the defense coordinator. But I'm the person that's going to talk to them. But we let all our coaches, speak to them, and everybody that's involved with the camp has been in the National Football League, and that's where all these guys want to play. So as much as they can speak to them, I think it's better for them.
Absolutely. Rod Woodson, our guest right now on Unpacking It, Pro Football Hall of Famer. And speaking of being a Hall of Famer and continuing to be associated, with this academy, but just being one of the members of the Hall of Fame. Now, you were inducted in 2009. What's maybe the best part of being a Hall of Famer? What does it mean to you to be a Hall of Famer?
Well, I can say, it would be great if I said it gave me special privileges at home, but it doesn't. I still got to take out the trash.
Yep.
I still got to clean the toilets. I still got to go get the groceries. So it doesn't give me any special privileges here.
I love it.
But but I think for being an ex-player, especially when you think about the NFL, only about 27,000 people have signed an NFL contract.
Mm.
And it's only and it's only like 330 some odd guys who've been inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So it's a small group. I'm very blessed to had a lot of natural talent, but along with that, I've had some great coaches when I first came in the league, especially when I went to Pittsburgh. I had Tony Dungy as my defensive coordinator, my defensive back coach, and then John Fox, who was a coach for a long time in the National Football League. He was a rookie coach that came in after that. And a guy named Rod Rust came in after that. And then after those guys left, and Chuck Noll was there, and Chuck Noll retired after the 5 years. Bill Cowher, Don Capers, and Dick LeBeau came in.
Mm.
So I had those guys for 5 more years. So I just been, I've been overly blessed with having some great mentors as coaches in my life, especially when I first came in.
Rod Woodson, our guest right now on Unpacking It. And so, in speaking about the Hall of Fame, and of course, in a couple weeks, we'll see the next class do their induction speeches, and it's always a special day of the year, and I love listening to just, kind of the perspective of different guys as they look back on their life and career. But when you gave your speech, it really was more about faith and family even than it was about football. So what was your approach to your speech, and what did you want your message to be when you were given that platform?
Well, that's a tough one because, and as I said in my speech, no island is unto himself. You don't do this stuff on your own. There's a lot of people behind you who do a lot of things for you as you're a kid, going all the way up through, high school or little league to high school, to college, to the pros. And so the first thing you do, you try not to forget any of those important people to think of. That's the first thing.
Mm.
And then secondly, you're trying not to overly get sensitive and overly emotional and just cry when you can't talk, and because you're going to thank the people that you love, especially when you start thinking your mom and your wife and your children. that's an emotional part of it. So that, you try to get through that barrier. But I think the biggest thing is, that it's a platform where that's the first time the mass audience gets to see who the individual player is.
Yeah.
And so, you're trying to tell your story in a decent time frame, even though I went pretty long, but in a decent time frame where, you're not making everybody extremely bored in the audience because you got 8 more guys behind you or 5 more guys behind you, but you don't want to forget anybody. To me, that was the biggest thing. That I want to tell my story. I want them to let them know who I was as a person, but I want to thank everybody who helped me get to that point.
Rod Woodson, our guest right now, and you mentioned all these different coaches that had such a big impact on your career, and then following your career, you've been able to spend some time as a coach, and you were with the Oakland Raiders a few years ago. So what did you enjoy most about being a coach, and what kind of drew you to pursue that?
Well, I always wanted to coach. I had the opportunity when Bill Cowher first retired. When I first retired and Bill was in Pittsburgh, he offered me the DB job. And at that moment, I wasn't ready mentally. When you spend, 17 years in the National Football League playing, it's hard to wrap your head around what you're going to do for coaching because the coaches are going to spend more time in the building. At that time, my kids were younger, but I always had that itch to do it because I always coach all my kids, their little teams when they were younger. So I always had that urge. But for me, it was to give back to what was given to me. What Tony taught me, what Dick taught me, what Chuck taught me, what some of my peers taught me. All those things that I remember and some of the things I taught myself over the course of my 17 years, that to give that back to the younger audience, the younger players. So hopefully they can somehow put that on their tool belt and use that to make them a better player and a better person. That's one of the main reasons I did it, and it was fun. I enjoyed my room. I enjoyed my guys. I had a great time speaking life into those guys and speaking football into those guys. We won some football games. We didn't win enough. That's why we got fired. But that's a cycle of life in sports. If you don't win, you get fired.
That's right. No question. Well, Rod, let's take a quick break, but we're just getting started. So much more to get into with the Hall of Famer, Rod Woodson, right here on Unpacking It. Our website, unpackingit.com. You can also find our podcast in Apple Podcasts and anywhere podcasts are found. More Unpacking It right after this.
Intriguing guests and inspiring conversations. This is Unpacking It with Bryce Johnson.
We're unpacking sports, faith, and life with Rod Woodson, and I'm Bryce Johnson. So glad to be with you today. Be sure to check out our website, unpackingit.com. And while you're there, subscribe to our weekday email devotional. We call it Unpack This, and it's a quick thought about sports, faith, and life that we send out through email each weekday. And so you can subscribe for free on unpackingit.com. Rod Woodson, our guest right now on Unpacking It. He's a Pro Football Hall of Famer, a Super Bowl winner, spent 17 years in the NFL. And in speaking about, being a coach, but also while you were playing, you were known for your leadership, and teams brought you in to be a leader and to, be an important voice in the locker room. What did you learn about leadership from initially watching others and even a lot of the coaches that you've mentioned, but then what was your strategy as a leader? What type of leader were you and continue to be?
Well, I think, first, to be a leader, you have to be able to lead yourself. You have to be able to lead yourself on a consistent basis of doing the right thing, being a pro, as we would call it. And being a pro is if the meeting starts at 8, you can't show up at 8. I need you to be there at 7:45, 7:50, so you can get ready, settled in. Always be prepared to listen. Always be prepared to write something down because you never know what your coach might say. He might say something that's not football related, it's life related, and it strikes a chord with you, and you can write that down and use that for the rest of your life. And that's some of the things I did throughout my career. And I felt there was an obligation on my behalf as I became an older player to be that guy, to be that voice in the locker room, to be, when I went to Baltimore, Ray Lewis was a third-year player. He was a baby. All those guys are babies. And, normally when you look at a locker room, everybody's seated in their position groups together. So my locker should have been next to other DBs. Well, they didn't have that. They had my locker right next to Ray Lewis and Peter Bower, right by the linebackers. So I knew Marvin wanted me to talk to Ray and Peter about football and life. And I felt it was my obligation because Donnie Shell was my roommate when I first came into the league. Donnie was like in his 13th or 14th year. So I played with Mike Webster. John Stallworth was there in Pittsburgh. All those guys poured into me in the year and 2 years that I played with those guys. So I felt it was an obligation to pour back into the younger generation. These guys, and Ray turned out to be arguably one of the best linebackers to ever play in the National Football League. He had tremendous talent, but he had a tremendous work ethic. And I think that's the key. That's something that Chuck Noll told me my rookie year. It's not about talent. It's about 2-to-1 mental to physical. And the guys who learn how to do that and apply it back on the practice field from the meeting rooms, they separate themselves from the average players to the great players.
Good stuff. Gosh, Rod Woodson, our guest right now on Unpacking It, won a Super Bowl with the Baltimore Ravens and Ray Lewis, of course, on that team as well. And Rod, we love talking football on this show, but we also just love hearing about our guests' faith journey. And so would love to hear a little bit about your story of grace and really how Jesus has changed your life and continues to change your life.
Well, I grew up Catholic. So my mom was Catholic. My dad was Southern Baptist. That's a heck of a mix, if you can think about it. But we grew up Catholic, going to the Catholic church. We would go to the Southern Baptist church on the south side of our hometown in Fort Wayne, Indiana, every blue moon. But normally we belonged to St. Mary's. We went to catechism classes as I got into my early teens. But then, so I was always kind of in and out of my faith growing up, going through it. And then once I got through college, I got married, and I think it was like our third year of marriage when my wife, Nikki, and we were leaving the Catholic church, and we were walking down the steps, and we just looked at each other and said, what? I need more. And then my wife was upstairs in our bedroom. It was probably that same time frame, probably around our third year of marriage, where she came down and said, I gave myself to Christ. And she was the first one to literally, like, physically, you give yourself to Christ, but then she followed Christ. A lot of people are believers, but people believe in the Easter Bunny. People believe in Santa Claus. Do you follow Christ? Do you walk with him? So she was really the first one to take that true initiative out of our relationship. And then, I saw her walk for the next previous years, and then I'm still in and out of really, really, really following Christ. I mean, I always believed in him, but I'm talking about really following him. And I go to Baltimore, and Rod Hairston was our team chaplain, and he kept pouring into me. And going into my last year there, Randall Cunningham comes in, and Randall's a senior pastor here in Nevada, over in the Houston area. He has a church over here. But he said something. He said, every time you sin, you persecute Christ again. And those words resonated with me and pierced my soul. And I was like, really? You got to say that this morning, right now? And that was the moment. That was a moment that my life changed. That was a moment that I started following Christ. That was a moment I became a true disciple of Christ. And I've been doing it ever since.
Amen. Gosh, well, incredible story. Rod Woodson, our guest right now on Unpacking It. And so this is a little bit later in your NFL career. So how did being in the NFL at that time, as you're becoming this disciple and really seeking the Lord, how was it challenging during that time? And how was it maybe an advantage because of the chaplains and other players surrounding you?
Well, it's definitely a challenge because this is a high testosterone level job, and it's not a lot of true followers, and you always want to fit in, and that's what I kind of did when I first came into the locker room, and trying to fit in. Where do I belong? How do I belong? How do I fit with the guys? It was a process for me, and God put me through that process to learn, to mold me, to build me, to strengthen me. Once I got to the point where I realized I could make a stand and had a true belief and had those morals and never cross it, and the guys would still respect me. And it was the same way when I went to coaching. How do you fit in the coaching world where every coach wants to cuss players out and belittle them, and that's not who I am. So how do I seem to be tough but fair without swearing and belittling and breaking guys down? Building them up with God's love and encouraging words. So that was challenging. But one thing that we found in Oakland, that we had quite a few men who follow Christ.
Yeah,
and we had a coach's Bible study every Monday. We had some really good guys there that we got to pray for each other and to be encouraging each other. We challenged each other when we saw one of the coaches kind of going sideways and not saying what he's going to do. And it made us better coaches, but it made us better men, especially godly men. One thing that we used to say in that room is that we were disciples of Christ disguised as NFL coaches, and that's really what we are. Yeah. If you're a disciple of Christ disguised as a radio host. That's right. And that's how we should live. We should all be disciples of Christ, and then whatever we do in our lives, we're just these guys. God just put us in that place so we can be encouraging to maybe just one person. It changes that one person's life, and we know that God is all about changing everyone's life, but one soul is better than no souls.
Amen. Amen. Rod Woodson, our guest right now on Unpacking It, Pro Football Hall of Famer, Super Bowl winner. Now he's an analyst with NFL Network, and so, as you've become this follower of Jesus and continue to follow him, how has that impacted your marriage and also your approach as a father to your 5 children?
Well, marriage it's made it better. Yeah. Like I said, my wife gave herself over to God before I did. Yep. So, she keeps me. If I'm not too loving at times to my kids, because I have 3 girls and 2 boys, she'll get on me a little bit about it, saying, you got to be a little bit more encouraging and use your encouraging words. We still can be challenging to our children because our children are older. We need to set the path for them and show them the way, and then they're going to have their own process that God's going to put them through. So, I think it's been outstanding. It's been a great move to come here. We're still looking for our church home here. So we've been kind of going to different places. So we gotta find that. But I think over the course of time, being a follower of God and Christ, a believer, I think it's made me a better father because it's made me more patient with my kids. Because we know that kids can be challenging even when they're in their mid, probably more challenging in their mid-20s and late 20s. But it's made me more understanding than what I used to be. And every time I want to look at that, I always go to Romans 12, and when it really talks about being a true man of God. And that's kind of like my benchmark of where I should be. And if I get too far away from that, I go back and read that chapter over again to kind of bring me back down to earth. He's Rod Woodson, and we're going to take one more break, but we're going to continue with Rod right after this on Unpacking It. I've got to ask him what he thinks about the 18-game season in the NFL, and I'll share my thoughts as well. And I think it's a fascinating topic, and so we'll hear what the Hall of Famer has to say about it when we come back. Our website is unpackingit.com. If you ever miss any part of the show, you can always check our podcast out in Apple Podcasts. Be sure to subscribe there or anywhere else podcasts are found. You can also email me, Bryce@unpackingit.com. More with Rod Woodson next.
Hey, it's Bryce Johnson, and it is time to start thinking about the upcoming fantasy football season. And good news, Unpacking It Ministries has a resource for you that will take you from the draft all the way through the championship. Order your Fantasy Football Fellowship playbook today, and each week, read about a fantasy concept and how it relates to the Bible and our own lives. It's designed for your league to discuss at weekly league meetings, on the phone, or in person. The FFF Playbook will add more meaning and purpose to the fantasy season and add value to your league. Grow in your faith, build deeper relationships with other owners in the league, and make more of your fantasy season. Join us at fantasyfootballfellowship.org and find all the details and order the FFF Playbook today. That's fantasyfootballfellowship.org.
Bringing you unique insight into the faith and character of guests from the sports world. Welcome back to Unpacking It with Bryce Johnson.
Rod Woodson, our guest right now. Well, talking about being a father, I'm actually going to be a first-time dad in just a few weeks. And so I've been asking my guests recently, what's maybe some wisdom you can share to me and any other first-time dad that's listening today? Because you've got to have some experience. You got 5 of them yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, well, first of all, just love them. Love them unconditionally. They're going to make mistakes. Love them anyway. You don't have to like the choices that they make, but you're still going to love them as your children. And I always kind of use an example and nobody really uses bar soaps anymore, so I don't even know if you've used a bar of soap in your life, but the old bar of soaps that we all used to use when we were kids, I use the examples that, if you hold it too tight, it squirts out of your hand. If you hold it too loose, it slips through your fingers. But if you hold it just right, it works and it cleanses you. So I would say hold your children just right, and God will do the rest.
Amen. Oh, that's great advice. I love that. It's a good illustration today as well. So I appreciate that. Well, Rod, I did want to ask you about your return to the NFL Network, because you were an analyst, then you became a coach, and now you're back with NFL Network. So what do you enjoy most about being an analyst, and how did that kind of process come about to return to that role?
Yeah, so I work with the NFL Network in Westwood One. Westwood One is a national radio broadcast.
Oh, yeah.
On Sirius for the NFL game. So I do that too with Howard Deneroff. But for me is that, I built a really good relationship with the NFL Network. I built a great relationship with Howard, and going back and working on air like that. First of all, it's a lot easier. It's less time constraint than coaching. But you still get to give your viewpoints. And probably the one thing you can do more often than not is that you can be wrong, but you won't get fired like you do if you're an NFL coach. So yep. It was really fun to go back. Because when NFL Network first started, I came in there in 2004, the first full year for it, and I was there for 8 years afterwards. So it was fun to see it grow. It's still growing. They're doing a tremendous job over there of just talking football and having fun with it. So it's good to be back in that building, representing Christ on air and having fun with the guys off the air.
That's awesome. Well, you do a great job. I'm glad to see you back on there, and cool to have your insight. And today, the big story in the NFL right now is wondering, wait, could the league actually go to a season that has 18 games? So what do you think about that possibility, and what are some of the thoughts that come to mind for you?
Well, I think two things. I think if they're going to go to 18 games, then the paychecks would have to increase to give them 2 more regular season games money. So out of that $234 million each team received a couple weeks ago, they would have to take a chunk of that and divide that up by whatever the players are making, and you got to add that to 2 more games. That's the first thing. So I don't know if if they want to lose money I mean, when you make millions and millions of dollars, really, you don't like giving it away. That's one. And then secondly, I think if it's player safety, we have a 53-man roster in the National Football League, but on game day, only 47 guys dress out. My argument has been for the longest is that all 53 guys go against the cap, all 53 players contracts go against the cap, and every player that goes against the cap should dress out on game day. So if somebody gets hurt, now an offensive lineman can play his position. A tight end can play his position. A running back can play his position. A linebacker can play his position. And you don't have to put him somewhere else where he really doesn't know. And now the likelihood of him getting hurt because he's second-guessing and he's hesitating increases. So, if they do something like that, I would love to see them take the 53-man roster and everybody's active on game day, no matter if they stay at the 16-game schedule. But definitely if they go to 18 games, they have to increase the bodies on the field, on the sideline, dressed out already, just to keep the players being safe.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense, and it's going to be fascinating to see how they work all this out and where the discussion goes from here. But Rod, man, really appreciate you joining us today on Unpacking It, and appreciate you just sharing about your story and your love for Jesus, and wish you the best now that you're moving to Las Vegas, and enjoy your time there and with your family, and have a great rest of the summer.
Well, I definitely appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
He's Rod Woodson, one of the best to ever play football, and really one of our best guests that we've had on this show. So a real honor to talk with him, and hopefully we'll get him back on the show at some point in the near future. And when I think about Rod Woodson, I have to think back to growing up playing the game Prime Time, the video game on Sega Genesis. It was Deion Sanders' game, and I actually looked it up. The graphics on that game, to look at it compared to Madden of today, it's crazy. But Rod Woodson, during those days, he was ranked a 99. He was an awesome player on the video game, because I used to love loading up and making trades to get as many 99s on my team. And so I think back as a young kid, Rod Woodson, he was one of those guys. So fun to be able to talk to a former video game hero of mine. And especially when you think about the Madden ratings came out this past week, and everybody had a response and an opinion on who should have gotten that 99. But hard to argue that Rod Woodson was a 99 back then. So one of the topics that we discussed with Rod Woodson was this whole conversation that really comes out each summer as owners are discussing, ideas for the league and how to make the NFL better and ultimately how to make more money. It's this idea of extending the season to have 18 games, which allows the league to have more revenue. And so everybody's got, kind of a different thought on it. And the one kind of latest idea or version of the proposal is to have teams only allow their players to play 16 games. So the team would play 18 games, but the player could only play 16. And at first glance, it's like, wait, that's outrageous. Like, how could they possibly do that? And ultimately, it just won't work. Like, there's too much pushback on it. And really, I think it affects the fans too much, because you can't show up to a game and not know if your star quarterback is going to play, because they're going to end up sitting him that game, and that will be his 1 week off. And you just can't have that. But when I take a step back for a moment and just pretend that this would happen, I find it really fascinating, because I think it would be hilarious to watch teams try to figure this out throughout the season, to try to guess, which weeks they should sit their wide receiver and not sit their quarterback, or do they sit the quarterback and the wide receiver during the same week, and what do they do about their running back, and do you just say, okay, we're playing the Bills this week or the Jets this week, and if you're the Patriots, you go, we don't worry about it, we'll sit Tom Brady this week, or do you sit your whole defense that week? There's just so many different ideas that go into it, and I always like more strategy, because as a fantasy football owner and as the commissioner, I'm always thinking of new ways to add wrinkles to the league, to make it more competitive, to add more opportunities for strategy. And so I do think if there was the the 16-game rule in an 18-game season, there would be new strategy, but ultimately it just wouldn't weigh out the downsides to making that move. And so it would make things too complicated, and I think they'll come up with something better. And actually, I started thinking about, okay, we got to get back to the idea of having 2 bye weeks. So you can extend the season, but just give teams more time off. And then I saw an article on TheRinger.com by Riley McAtee, and the headline is, an 18-game NFL season doesn't make sense, but adding a second bye week does. And I really agree with the premise of this article, and I think this could ultimately work for the league. Now, they did try this back in 1993, and there was a lot of pushback, but as the article writes, we've learned, the league has learned, how to incorporate bye weeks better than they did back then, because it was kind of a new concept to even have 1, and then they tried to add 2. And so all these years later, with the understanding that you can spread those bye weeks out more, teams can kind of divide up the season in different ways, where you play a few games, then you get a break, and then you can play a few more, get another break, and then finish the season strong. I love it. But ultimately, as a fan and as a TV watcher, I like the idea of having less teams playing every week. Now, some would argue, you want as many possibilities for great games, out there. But I watch the Red Zone channel, and sometimes, when there's 6 games going on, I'm seeing all the highlights of all those games, and I'm catching a lot of action, and it is nonstop action. But I would actually like to see a little bit more of the buildup of different games. So if I'm watching, 3 or 4 games instead of 5 or 6, it's a little bit easier to consume, and that's what I like as a fan. So if you spread out the games throughout an 18-week season, I think that works. So teams continue to play only 16, but you get 2 byes, and then you just have less games during those specific bye weeks. So check out the article. I tend to agree with the premise, and I think that there's a little bit more of a possibility surrounding that, because the players and the owners can figure out how to split the money where everybody wins. Everybody can make more money, and then as fans and even as fantasy owners, we can adapt, and we'll take another week of football. I don't think that we need another week of football. It's plenty long now, but if they are as greedy as they are and they feel like there's a market for another week, I think it comes down to the viewing side of the revenue versus focusing on, we've got to add 2 more weeks so that teams are playing 2 more games. And then you're getting all the revenue from stadiums. I think you always got to think, with the way things are going, to me, it's all about the viewing. It's not just TV. It's streaming and everything that comes along with that. But I'm a Red Zone viewer, and so I still like to see as much action as possible, but sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. But those 4 o'clock games, when there's only 3, sometimes 2 games going on, it's basically back and forth. That's a nice way to watch. It really is. And I, of course, go 3 TVs on Sundays, so I always love that. But I'm intrigued by it all. I think it's interesting. Would love to know your thoughts. You can send me an email, Bryce@unpackingit.com, Bryce@unpackingit.com. And so you extend the regular season by 1 week. You take 1 week away from the preseason. That week 4 is always kind of a waste anyway, and I think it ends up working out pretty good. So that's where I come out on it. Again, we'd love to know your thoughts. Bryce@unpackingit.com. All right, so coming up next, we're going to do our segment Unpack This about the Kansas City Chiefs. And their offense last year was incredible, but their defense struggled. And so they made a change on defense, and they've tried to simplify things. And based on some of the OTAs and the offseason, there's already been a positive response to these changes. And so coming up, I'll explain how simplicity can relate to our own lives and specifically when it comes to our faith. Because oftentimes we make things so complicated, and we just got to get back to simplifying the truth. And so we'll get into that next. It's Unpacking It. I'm Bryce Johnson. Our website, unpackingit.com. Thanks so much for being with us.
inspiring conversations, and intriguing interviews. More Unpacking It with Bryce Johnson after this.
This is Unpacking It. I'm Bryce Johnson. It's time for our final segment of the day. We call it Unpack This, where I take a current sports story and relate it to the Bible and our own lives. So let's jump right in. Last season, the Kansas City Chiefs had one of the best offenses in the league, but their defense was one of the worst. They ranked 31st in total yards and 26th in points allowed per game. Because of this, head coach Andy Reid decided to make a change at defensive coordinator and brought in Steve Spagnuolo to coach that side of the ball. Every coordinator has their own style and philosophy to help maximize what their players can do on the field. And based on the offseason practices, the new approach has been a positive change. TheAthletic.com has an article by Nate Taylor with the headline, "Simple is Good. Anthony Hitchens finding comfort in new scheme after complicated, lackluster year under Bob Sutton." Hitchens, the Chiefs' star linebacker, said, "Simple is good for a lot of players." In speaking further about Spagnuolo's scheme, Hitchens said, "Once you get it down, everyone can play fast. It lets you run free a lot." Just like many coaches or players can overcomplicate the game of football with their fancy terms, complex schemes, and cumbersome game plan, we can do the same in life and even in our faith. We can allow ourselves to be so overwhelmed by the intricacies of the Bible or so bogged down by trying to do everything perfectly that we get discouraged and confused. Now, we should continue to grow in our understanding, but we want to stay rooted in what is simple. Solomon provides this simple wisdom in the Bible. When all has been heard, the end of the matter is, fear God, worship him with awe-filled reverence, knowing that he is Almighty God, and keep his commandments, for this applies to every person. Just like football players can play freer when things are simplified, we can find tremendous freedom and joy when we allow God's simple truths to guide our lives. Today, when life feels complicated, let's rest in the grace available to us because of the simple yet profound truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And let's remain focused on simply loving God and loving people. So I hope you're willing to unpack that for yourselves and really appreciate you joining me today. I'm Bryce Johnson. I'm a sports fan who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sins, he was resurrected, and through faith, I have been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well, and I hope you'll join me as we live life as sports fans who follow Jesus together. Have a wonderful week. This has been Unpacking It with Bryce Johnson on Sports Byline USA and SiriusXM, Channel 211, Dan Patrick Radio.